With us today, we have Gary Abitz, who is a game developer for Draiochta. Gary, I'm going to ask you a few questions. How did you get started with Draiochta?
I got brought in when the game was in a very rough alpha state, just to try to, play test and just give it a shot, see what it was. Swiftly started spending way too much time trying to find ways to break the rules that were there, and it kind of snowballed out of there.
And what do you do now for Draiochta?
Pretty much whatever needs to be done with the rules. I mean, last two big things we did was we wrote modules. I was primarily in charge of designing the encounters for them. Right now we're writing a guide for crafting and tinkering, so I most of the time deal with the back end mechanics of the thing more than the front end of what people actually see.
Okay. What's your favorite part about working for Draiochta?
It's interesting. I mean, with the modules, it's entertaining because, well, as a GM, I generally try to kill my players, and this way I can try to kill as many of them as possible. I mean, even with everyone else trying to stop me.
So you're saying that your modules inside, or your encounters inside the module are deadly?
I tried. Everyone else kind of neutered them a little bit, so this most recent one, the second module we actually did, is a little bit more extreme than the first one we did, but
how is that? How is it more extreme than the first one?
The first one's got a lot of very standard. You fight the random gang members who are poorly equipped because they're gang members. So the people aren't really that big of a threat. And the second one, you end up venturing out into the wilderness, and then the creatures in the world give a lot more room for gratuitous violence, we'll
Do we have
call
to
it.
fight that creature that's behind you in the picture there?
That one, yeah. You get to fight one or two of them, depending. They shoot sticky spores of highly flammable goo at you.
What is that creature called?
That is a spore cannon turtle. It's very descriptive in its name.
I guess so. What's your favorite part of Draiochta? The game itself.
Game itself. Most likely the leveling system, because unlike a traditional arbitrary experience points, you hit a point and then everything gets better. Things get better the more you use them. So the leveling is much more organic. It doesn't necessarily give the big payoffs, like when you hit your big milestones and just get tons of stuff, but you're constantly getting a little bit better.
Can you extrapolate on that? How do you gain progress?
Well, it works on a percentile system, and then generally using a standard build, your characters will have skills somewhere between 25 to, if you're really math hammer it and you pick the right class combination, you can hit the low 50s. And then, so that number is your percentage to succeed. You have to roll under that on a percentile die to succeed. And then every time you succeed, you track that success. And then depending on how advanced your skill is, you have to succeed a certain amount of times. And then that number goes up and up and up. And then there's various tiers as well at 25, 50, 75, and 75, where you get both special abilities that allow you to do more with, say, your weapons or whatnot, and then your damage would also increase at those points.
Oh, so I don't have to wait till I level up or get a new weapon for the damage to go?
Not, well, yeah, level up to an extent, kind of, because you have to use the weapon enough, but there's no... You can use the same weapon the entire game, and it will get better with you.
Oh, that's excellent. What expansions are you excited for that are coming out for Draiochta?
It's not currently in the release schedule like immediately, but a little ways out we have planned a expansion that highlights primarily on the dark ones or tainted ones, I believe that we settled on a name for them, and they are twisted versions of most of the normal races, and they're a little bit more destructive and just generally more fun to work with. And we have a book scheduled eventually here, probably in the next year or two, that is focusing entirely on them and their societies and how they operate, much like the racial descriptions that are in the player's handbook for the player races are. And that's personally my most interesting book that I'm most interested in, just because if you like killing your players, the evil versions of your players are kind of the best way to go a lot of the time.
Excellent. What project are you guys currently working?
Right now, it's the crafting and the tinkering guide. That'll give a more in-depth description of how you go about making your own weapons, special materials and stuff you can use to make your own weapons. For the tinkering, it's a lot more guides and pieces and information on tinkering itself, because it's a very broad topic. And in the player's handbook and the game master's guide as it stands, it's you can do this, and these are your general guidelines, and it costs this many Steam points to do X. With the book that's coming out, it's got a lot more guidelines to, you can use these different parts that you can get from these kind of vendors to put into your machines, and they do this, or help do this. We have some default schematics and stuff like that in there for players who want to play a gnome but don't necessarily have the time or the energy really to put into designing their own grand custom thing.
So it makes it a little bit easier for the player to kind of understand how the world works.
Yeah, a little bit.
Excellent. Can you tell us about Draiochta? Tell us about the game. From your perspective.
It's obviously a tabletop RPG. We're looking at doing some more interesting elements a little on farther down the road, including augmented reality and stuff. But as it stands currently, with the editions that are out right now, it's a standard tabletop RPG. Very rewarding combat system that's very responsive, essentially, because pretty much anything that happens to you or you do to someone else, you can do something else to try to mitigate it, or the GM can do something else. So it's very back and forth.
How does that work in the system? How do you do that?
Well, there's two primary defensive skills, like to just straight cancel damage, and that would be dodge or shield. And depending on which is which, shield, you have a better chance of just negating it. But
How do you do
then,
that?
well, you obviously have to be carrying a shield, and then different shields have different percentages of cover that they grant you. And then when someone attacks you, first they have to attack you and manage to hit you, and then they have to manage to roll whatever is under your shield percentages. So like if you were wearing, or if you were using per se a large shield, it would be they'd have to roll under a 25% to be able to actually hit you. And then your character would actually be able to actively attempt to block using his shield as well. And then if all of that fails, they'd actually get through to be able to hit you as the character. And then if you were wearing armor at all, that would take damage off the top as well.
So shield users are kind of hard to fight one-on-one.
Yeah.
Right. Is it a little bit easier for two people to gang up on them?
Yeah, because they have to designate like one person to primarily shield against, and that affects their facing. The game is played on a hexagonal grid map, and depending on which way your characters are facing, who their primary targets is, you can't necessarily defend against people behind you as easily and things of that nature.
Okay.
And then the other primary way to mitigate damage is dodging, where someone attacks you, you try to dodge, and if you succeed, you get the heck out of the way.
That sounds like an interesting system. If you could say anything to the Draiochta players out there, what would you say?
That's a tough one. Players most likely don't forget your non-combat skills because a lot of times you're focused on your combat skills in the game because that's what's going to be life or death. But your non-combat skills are just as useful because they affect your character advancement as much as anything else does. So if you're in town, there's things for you to do other than sit there and stare at a wall. You can go out and try to make use of some of your character's non-combat skills, and it'll advance you just as much as if you were slogging through the forests, getting attacked by birds with razor-sharp talons.
Excellent. Do you have any shoutouts that you want to make?
Not really.